Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on fostering student curiosity in your online courses. We are going to be getting started a few minutes after the top of the hour. We want to give everybody time to get into our iClicker course. So if you would, go check your registration email, the email that you used to join. That has your directions in it of how to create an iClicker account if you don't have one, and join the course that our presenter will be using today. I've also put those directions in the chat panel. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm getting a little audio feedback. Let's see. Okay, that went away. I've also put those questions in the chat panel that you can refer to if you need full directions. And we are standing here to answer questions if you need them. And yes, sorry, there might be a couple of courses accidentally also named Going Virtual Student Curiosity. You want to join the one that the instructor is Jose Vasquez. Hi, everyone. For folks just joining us, we are going to be getting started in a few minutes. We just want to give everyone time to join the iClicker course. As you can see on our presenter screen, there's the institution and the course name. The instructor name is also, I wanted to make sure everybody knew, the instructor name is Jose Vasquez. That's the course you want to join. If you need detailed instructions on how to join the iClicker course, please consult the chat, shoot us a question in the question panel, or you can go to the email that you used to join this session today, and there are instructions on how to join iClicker there. Again, we'll get started in just a few minutes. And while we're waiting, Jose, do you want to do a quick check and see how many people are in your course?
Okay. It looks like I have 23.
23. Okay, great. Oh, also, sorry, a little bit of feedback. You also might be seeing the instructor show up as iClicker presenter. It should show up as iClicker presenter and Jose Vasquez, but you might see iClicker presenter first, so sorry about that. Okay, thank you guys for joining us. For those of you who are just now getting on, I'm making this announcement every couple of minutes. We're going to be using iClicker today in the presentation. So you can look at the institution and the course name on the screen. You probably will see a course name, a couple of those that say Going Virtual. You'll look for the one that has the instructor designated as iClicker presenter and Jose Vasquez. It might say just iClicker Presenter in the view that you're looking at. If you need more detailed instructions, please consult the chat, shoot us a question in the Q&A panel, or go to your email that you used to join this session, and that will have the detailed instructions in there too. Again, this is all completely optional if you want to join us and play along with iClicker. If you don't want to, that's totally fine. You'll be able to see how it works. And we're getting quite a few questions come through. We are getting to those as quickly as possible. Okay, we're at about 5 minutes after. So we're going to be using iClicker today in the presentation. It's just to be able to get feedback from the crowd. iClicker is a quick way for Jose, our presenter, to be able to see what you guys think. And if you're following along, and also to be able to demonstrate how he uses iClicker in his course. It's completely optional. Feel free to just follow along if you want, or join the course if you'd like to. The institution and the course name are up on the screen. The presenter name will be iClicker Presenter and Jose Vasquez, or just iClicker Presenter. If you need more detailed instructions, send us a question in the question panel, consult the instructions in the chat panel, or you can check your email that you used to join the course. That has the detailed instructions as well. But without further ado, we will get started today. If you're ready, Jose, I think there's a little bit of feedback. Okay, so
and you would spell that bond. Higher rating for the rating agents believe that if all of these mortgages were together, they would have less likelihood of failing. The second belief was that the value of real estate would go down. So when the Lehman Brothers of the world packaged these CDOs, they scored a A-rated investment.
Sorry, there's a little bit of feedback coming through. Jose, can you hear us okay?
I can hear you. You're gonna give me a cue when to start, right?
Okay, I just hear some feedback coming through from...
I do too, actually, but it's not coming from here. I'm muted.
Okay, okay, that seemed to work. Whatever I just did seemed to work. Okay, now we're officially getting started, guys. Thank you for joining us for our third webinar in the Going Virtual series. Today's webinar is entitled Going Virtual, How to Create Student Curiosity in Remote Instruction Courses. So before we get started today, a couple of housekeeping items. If you have any questions at all, please shoot them in the questions panel and we will get to them as quickly as possible. We'll also have questions for Jose at the end of the webinar that Jose will address. So we'll get to as many of those as possible during the webinar today. If we can't get to them live, we will follow up with you. You are muted just for to decrease background noise, so just keep that in mind. So without further ado, I will introduce our presenter. So Jose Vasquez is a clinical professor at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, where he teaches 3 sections of one of the largest economic courses in the country. He has around 925 students. This is in addition to the more than 100,000 people who have registered over the last 5 years to take his very popular Principles of Micro and Moot course in Coursera. It's probably safe to say no other instructor has taught economics to more students. In addition to his role as an instructor, Dr. Vasquez is also director of the Teaching Academy for the School of Liberal Arts and Sciences. During his tenure at Illinois, he has received several teaching awards, including Outstanding Teacher of Freshman Award. He's also the co-creator of Flip It Economics, along with Eric Chang of Florida Atlantic University. Flip It Econ, published by Macmillan, is a multimedia solution that helps students prepare effectively for class.
Flashing.
Dr. Vasquez also is a leader in the use and study of technology in higher education, in particular multimedia design. Recently, his research has been in the area of mental attention and student motivation, particularly the role of curiosity as a way to incentivize students. He's published his work in several academic journals and is presented at numerous academic conferences. So we are absolutely thrilled today to have Jose on to talk to you guys. We are recording and we'll follow up with a recording within a day. So Jose, I'm going to pass it over to you now.
Thank you. Let me start by kind of describing the situation here. When I'm talking to you, I have I'm not here alone. I have my daughter and I have a few dogs here with me.
What did you do?
All right. Want to say hi?
Click that to make it bigger.
And then we also have a puppy here that she was really eager to show all of you guys. There she is. All right, thank you, Dave. Okay, so now that I made myself human and show you that I exist, I'm gonna make this appear. Now, in addition to my work in Curiosity, I have been teaching online for about 20 years. My principles of Econ MOOC, for instance, have been running on Coursera nonstop for 8 years. It was actually the first such course by the University of Illinois. So during this webinar, I will also try to use that experience teaching online as well as my own research in attention and multimedia that I've done with my colleague Eric Chang to share with you some quick tips about online teaching, in particular synchronous sessions like this ones. They're not really related to the topic of curiosity, but I figure it's something many of us need these days. And the first one of such of those tips you can do it with your verbal style you use. So, try to use an informal style. But once you do that, you have to make yourself disappear. Your face is very distracting to students, and all the research I have seen and I have done show that the effect on student learning of having your face in the video is actually negligible or even negative. So there you go. That's the first tip. I'll give you a few more as we progress. Now let me start with a demonstration here that I want to get your feedback on with the clickers. So here's the video. You're not going to hear any sound, but it's going to be pretty clear after you watch this video, the question I am going to ask you. All right, so let's watch it. All right, two balls, same size. One track is longer, has dip. The other one track is shorter. Here's a question for you. Which ball is going to end the end of the track quicker? The high track, the one going on the dip track, or do you think they're going to reach the end at the same time? You can click their answer now with your iClicker polling app whenever you're ready. And then once I get a few answers, I'll start telling you what's going on here. So I've done this question with over many times with many people in person. It's one of the first time I do it on a webinar. So during those presentations in person, it's really clear that people actually care about the answer. So yeah, I don't get any feedback from you, but it's a pretty intriguing question. So I would suppose most of you care what the answer to the question is if you've never seen the video. Now, if you don't care about the answer, if this was my class, I could do a couple of things to make you care. I can actually try to give you points, which will make you care pretty quickly, but it might not make you like it, right? Now, I can also tell you, if you're not my students, and I had some control over your destiny, I can tell you where you're not going to get paid next week if you don't actually answer the question correctly, which will definitely make you care, but it might not make you care for the right reasons. Now, let's see if I can make you care in a different way. So I already know that most of you chose C as the right answer, and I can tell you that that's not right. I've seen the video, and that's not the right answer. So if you voted C, I suggest that you find a better answer, because I will show you the video at some point, and you'll see that that's actually not the right answer. So think about it a little more, if you want. So I propose that some people actually care a little bit more than before. Well, definitely those people who chose C probably care quite a bit because they're looking for a new home. But I think everyone care quite a bit more because you have a high probability of being right. Here's another thing I can tell you. If you ever been on one of these amusement parks rides, the principle in here is the same. So you should be able to actually know the answer to the question. In other words, if you ever seen or written one of these ones, you should be able to answer this question correctly. And again, that's another way in which I'm arguing that for some of you, this may actually make you care a little bit more than before. And if I did, just make a mental note that I did it without giving you any points, all right? This is all coming from inside you. Now, some people tell me, well, this is easy because it's a physics question. Physics questions are pretty easy. Or not pretty easy, but they're pretty interesting. And here's what I think being an economist is really useful, because I teach what is considered the most boring class in college, which is Economics 101. So I think if I can convince you that I can make you care for a question that is economics, I think I can make a pretty good case. So let me stop the polling on this one, and let me ask you an econ question, all right? Before I let you vote, let me present the question to you. So you want a free ticket to see Eric Clapton in concert. Now, Bob Dylan is performing on the same night, and it's your most attractive alternative. Now, if I were doing this question to my students, I have to explain to them that Eric Clapton and Bob Dylan are musicians. I suppose I don't have to explain it to you, right? Let me give you a few more information about Bob Dylan. If you're going to see Bob Dylan, it costs you $40, but you're willing to pay $50 to see him. Now, if you know anything about opportunity costs, or if you have ever taken a class on economics, or you ever been faced with a concept of opportunity cost, you have all the information in front of you to answer this question. What is the opportunity cost of seeing Eric Clapton? I'm going to give you 4 choices. It is one of those, all right? So if you know what opportunity cost is, which I can tell you is the cost that economists suggest is a relevant cost, which is what you give up in order to do something, then the answer to this question is in front of you, and you should be able to answer it. So you can vote your answer whenever you're ready, and I can kind of give you some feedback. All right, so here's what I have. Kind of let me show you what I have here. So here's what I have so far. These are some of the answers I have. And I can tell you that A is not the right answer. That's actually, I would say most economists will disagree with you. So just believe me that that's not the right answer. I'll try to explain to you why I think that's not right, and see if you can find another answer that makes sense to you, but not A, all right? And again, what I'm trying to do by telling you that is, I think this, this puzzle is pretty interesting. But if you were not so interested, I would argue that by telling you one of the choices is not the one I think is correct, some of you may actually be more interested than before. So you can keep voting. I'll give you a few more seconds. And here's another thing I can do for this one. So so why don't I ask you to write to me what you think is the right answer? So if you answer B or C or D, I'm going to ask you to write a short answer about, let's say, 1 sentence, and tell me why you think the answer is such. All right? Just use your devices. You should be able to type a sentence. And just tell me why you chose the answer you chose. And just type it in the space that you have provided. And what I can do now is I can share some of those with you. Here it is. A lot of people are guessing, which is what I was suggesting, right? It's a pretty hard question. But other people have actually, they're not guesses, they're educated guesses, right? So, so here is what some other people chose. And as you see that, you can use that to perhaps change your answer or think differently about your answer. I can do a little word cloud here. And let's see what we got. This is interesting to me. Costs, Eric Clapton. I haven't had econ since 1994. I like that one. But opportunity cost is the one thing you should have learned, right? I mean, that is the one thing that if you forget everything, if you remember at least that, then the class was so useful, all right? Okay, so let me close the polling and say here a couple of things. Now let's take a break here to talk about what's going on here. Now, by now, it should be obvious that the answer to my question of why do you care is, even if you have no skin in the game, is simply because you're curious, all right? But it's more important why were you curious? In fact, actually, more importantly was your curiosity a direct result of something I did intentionally to make you curious? I mean, imagine if instead of using the Clapton and Dylan question to make you curious about opportunity cost, I had used this question. Now, I'm pretty sure your motivation to participate would have been completely different if I had used this question, regardless of whether you would have had it right or not. So clearly, there was some method behind the madness here. Like, why is the other question more effective? If in fact it was more effective, why was that? And what else did I do in addition to that to capitalize on that question, on that curiosity? So what I'm gonna do in the next few minutes is to tell you a little bit about what I did in this particular questions, on two questions, in order to increase your curiosity. Now, before I do that, notice that this webinar now is gonna switch from being a little interactive to me front of the room information. So instead of an active participant, you will now be a passive listener. And in fact, I already closed the voting. Now, this was my class. I will probably do things differently. I will probably let you vote again. I will eliminate another answer and give you a bit more information. And I continue to process that way. I will probably do 2 or 3 questions like this, and that will be it for my class. That would be a much more cost-effective way to use my students and my time, since the type of back and forth that we just did in these 2 questions will be harder to replicate in an asynchronous way, like a discussion forum. Not impossible, but it will be difficult. But telling them stuff like definition of opportunity costs could easily be replicated with a recorded video of myself or something like that. It will not be cost effective to do it in a Zoom time version. So here's another tip for you. If you do have to do a synchronous version, a Zoom class, type of Zoom class, focus on motivation, rather than information transfer. Now, if you do have to do some information transfer, which is what I'm going to do now, just be brief, all right? A good way of doing that is by maybe writing an outline or by writing even very, very detailed notes. Now, unfortunately for you, this is what I'm going to do. This is not my class for a webinar, so we need to stop the fun. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I did with these 2 questions. And again, it's very different to what I do when I do this presentation in front of the room, in which I actually do rely a lot more on less interactivity and more in front of the room. But today I want to tell you 3 things. Why do we focus on curiosity, or the argument for using curiosity? What theory of curiosity I'm using in order to generate these ideas? And finally, 5 specific strategies I use today with those 2 questions to increase the curiosity you had in the activities. So let's go for the first one. So why curiosity? I think the first one I try to show it to you with a model is because when it works, it's pretty effective. It's a pretty strong motivator. It's almost as strong, or it could be even more strong than external rewards like points. But regardless, it definitely comes from within the student. So it's motivation that comes from within, and it's a strong motivator. In fact, psychologists actually refer to curiosity as a drive, like thirst, or the drive for food. And when it works, that's how it is. You have to have the answer. Many of you perhaps feel that way about those 2 questions. You need to know what the answer is. Some of you may have already looked for the answer to those questions because you couldn't really wait any longer. Obviously, it's not a chance that I'm making you wait for the answer a little more. But finally, the last reason is kind of what I saw in my daughter, and this is when she was a lot younger than it is now. And when I noticed when she was like 1.5, 2 years old, is that she was really, really curious. And when she was curious, she was really, really focused. But not only that, she was enjoying that activity. So curiosity, when it works, it's not only strong, and it's not only connected to knowledge, but it's also very pleasurable. And in fact, I actually saw that with my dog too. This is my previous dog, Dashiell. And when Dashiell was free to roam the forest, he was very, very happy when he was seeking, all right? Which is essentially what curiosity is to seek an answer. So I think one of the main arguments I made for curiosity is that when it works, it's strong, but it's also pleasurable. A lot more pleasurable than when the students have points at stake. So now, what is curiosity, or what is the theory of curiosity I use today in order to generate curiosity in you? The theory of curiosity I use is the one that I find most practical. It's called the gap theory of curiosity, information gap theory of curiosity. And it was developed by a behavioral economist in 1996. And it's pretty straightforward, which is one of its benefits. It says that we become curious when our attention focuses on the information we need to fill subjective gaps in our knowledge. And in its simplicity lies, it actually is power, right? And it has revolutionized the study of curiosity, and particularly the application of curiosity, because it offers a very interesting operational definition of curiosity. You can use it to generate curiosity. So it has been used quite extensively in many areas, such as marketing and business. And what I propose today to you, and which I've been proposing for the last 3 years, is that we do the same thing in education and teaching. We use it that way. But first, let's make sure that you understand what the definition means, particularly the important relationship it has to mental attention. All right. Now consider this red space here. Consider the red represents the information you have about a topic. Let's say curiosity. All right. Under information gap theory, you will not be very curious, since your attention is focused right now on the red and the very little information you have. You cannot avoid seeing white, but you're not focusing on white. White is background noise. Your eyes are going to red. In other words, if curiosity equivalent is that you're overwhelmed with all the information you don't have, so you won't be very curious. Now, say I change the image by filling the space with red in this way. Now you're curious. In fact, you're very curious because you're focusing on the little white space, which is the information you lack. This is exactly the reasons you're curious about the multiple choice questions I presented you at the beginning, right? You were missing a very small piece of the puzzle, the right choice, or even more basic puzzle. The choice I think is correct because I had seen the video before and I have seen that question before. Now, let me show you a little bit of insight of why this is practical, all right? Suppose I ask you the following question. Now, does this question make you curious? No, obviously not. I mean, it may generate other emotional feelings, but it was not gonna make you curious. And why not? Well, according to information gap theory, it doesn't make you curious because there's no gap, right? When there's no gap, there's no curiosity. But what about this question? Now, this question also generates very little curiosity, but it's for a whole different reason altogether. The information gap is too large. You have no idea what the answer is, all right? So this question generates very little curiosity because the gap is too large. So, so what about if I do this? Did your curiosity increases when I remove 3 of the choices? Now, according to information gap theory, it should have increased for some of you. Since now I'm reducing the information set, and hence I'm reducing the information gap, so you have to pay more attention to it, all right? So for some people, they're actually a lot more curious. So essentially what I did is I was there, and I removed some choices, closed the information gap, and now you're there, all right? So again, it may not be for all of you, but I bet for some of you are now really wondering who is the president of Mongolia a lot more than when you have 5 choices. And if you are one of those people, then what happened here is I have manipulated your curiosity by using this idea of information gap theory. I essentially reduced your information gap by providing you more information, and I made you more curious, all right? And I did that without giving you external rewards. All of that is coming from inside. That is how you put into practice this information gap theory. Pretty cool, right? So here's what I propose. I propose we operationalize information gap theory, and we use it to teach our students. And the way we do it is by focusing our students' attention to the information gaps. All right? And I'm going to give you the 5 things I did today with the questions today in order to achieve that with the 2 questions I did at the beginning. All right. So I'm going to give you 5 curiosity strategies that I use today, which you can hopefully do pretty quickly in your courses. And by the way, here's another tip for presentations come from curiosity. Whenever you're going to tell people something, always count them for them. It's not only beneficial because of curiosity, you're opening a gap that you're going to close little by little, but also the brain likes movement. So every time you actually tell people you're going to tell them 5 things and then you start counting, the brain actually is very soothing to the brain, and it makes them pay more attention than before. Okay, so the first strategy I use, ask a question. Clearly, the easiest way to make students to pay attention to an information gap is to explicitly ask them to focus on that gap with a question. But not all questions are the same. For instance, imagine I have tried to generate curiosity for the principle of motion, which is the principle that I was in play at the multiple choice from the video, rather than with that video multiple choice question, with this question. That would not have been very effective at generating curiosity, I would argue. Or imagine I would have tried to generate curiosity for the concept of opportunity cost. Instead of using that multiple choice with Eric Clapton and Bob Dylan, I would have actually used this question. Again, I would argue that that question would be a lot less effective at generating curiosity. So clearly, some questions are better than others at generating curiosity in students. And to be honest, which questions are better probably requires its own separate webinar. But I can tell you that the 2 questions I used today share the following 3 features. First, they ask you to make a choice rather than an open-ended question. And this might be surprising to some of you. Now, choice questions are effective in creating curiosity gaps and hence curiosity because they achieve 2 basic things. They create an am I right gap, which is very appealing and alluring for most people. But they also reduce the information set. Now, since curiosity requires a small gap in the information set, every time I close the information set or constrain it, by definition, I am actually making people more curious because I'm reducing the information gap. So questions in which people have to make a choice are always going to be a lot more curiosity inducing than questions that don't. Now, I can also generate curiosity or by closing the information set by doing something even more explicitly, which is by providing context. And you notice that in my 2 questions had a specific scenario, and the specific scenario helped in closing the information gap for all of you and hence creating more curiosity. So good questions are probably going to have more context and less context. Or every time you provide a scenario to students, you create more curiosity by closing the information sets. And finally, one thing that both questions achieve is that they're both highly conceptual. Now, these questions are much better than definition type questions because the right answer is much more hidden. In fact, nothing I told you so far requires you to have questions with one single answer. In fact, I do not think a requirement of a question to generate curiosity is that the question has a single answer. By the way, the question on opportunity costs that I use, the very famous questions, and there have been at least 5 papers published in peer-reviewed journals of different economists offering their different answers. So one interpretation is that the answer really depends on your assumptions. All right, I tend to think that there is one answer, but many economists think it's a different one. And precisely because the question doesn't have a clear answer is what makes this question fantastic for curiosity. It perhaps not make it for an exam, but it makes it really good for discussion. So that's the other 4 strategies I'm going to give you. They both actually try to do 2 things: get commitment by raising the stakes, and then provide more information to make the gap smaller. All right. For instance, an easy way to get commitment and hence to increase curiosity is by asking students to vote using a polling device as or application like I did today with you. Notice that the polling device increases commitment without you or without the need to offer extra points. This is essentially the same way you will get commitment from students if you ask them a multiple choice question and then ask them to raise their hands if you are in an in-person type of situation. So in a Zoom type of a synchronous session, the polling device is an effective way to replace the raise your hand. In fact, the native polling device that Zoom has could achieve that. But so, some of you may actually wish to do that, and indeed that would be better than not using anything. But still, there are a few ways in which I actually capitalize on the fact that you were using an external polling device like iClicker rather than on the native polling solution that Zoom has. And the first one was to easily send real-time information that you sent to me, and I use that information to send feedback back to you. And the easy way, the first way I try to do that is by eliminating choices based on what you already responded. That's a very easy way to send real information back to you and then closing your gap, all right? So eliminating incorrect distractors is a very effective way of increasing curiosity. So this is the way I did it today. So when you answer this question, you actually split yourself in a very similar way to when people split this question when they actually see the question for the first one. So I look at the answer, I eliminate choices strategically that I thought would increase curiosity, and usually I start with the very popular ones that perhaps are kind of incorrect or disagree with me. So I eliminate that one and I keep 2. Now this generates curiosity for those students who are left without a home and they need to find a new answer. Those students will be highly motivated, but also all the other students are motivated because they're closer to the answer. You have closer information set, all right? The other way I used the iClicker tool today was to ask you, and by the way, I did that the same way with the opportunity cost question. I did exactly the same thing, right? I eliminated that choice. In fact, today I think I eliminated 0. I usually eliminate 40 first and then 0. So now I'm giving you two big tips is that the answer to this question is neither 0 nor 40. Well, I would say the answer that most economists would tell you. Okay, so the other thing I did today, in particular this question, I asked you to write an explanation for the choice. And what this achieves is that when you're writing the answer, you're actually committing to the answer even more. And the more commitment you have on the answer, the more attention you're going to pay to, the more you're going to pay attention to it, and hence the more curious you will be, and the more motivated you will be. But also, if I share the answers with the rest of the class, as I did with you, in which I was kind of sharing your answers, again, I am giving you information and closing your information gap and actually even making you more curious. If I was in an in-person class, I would probably ask students to share the answers, their justifications out loud, but in a synchronous online version, this is a very effective way of doing a similar thing. And finally, the last thing I did today is to simply explicitly make you focus on your previous self. Now, I reminded you or suggested the possibility that your previous self already had the answer to this question. Now, think about it. The closer you are to closing the gap, the more curious you will be. This is the reason why the most curious you are on the gender of your child during the pregnancy is when you are the sonogram room and the technician tells you, oh, I already know the gender, but he hasn't told you. At that point, you're so close to closing the gap that you probably will become physically violent if they're not telling you the information you need to close the gap. So what is the closest you can be to the answer is your previous self. So the easy way to make your students very curious about a question is to simply tell them you already answered this question before. Either tell them they have answered explicitly or give them an information like I did with you today that most of you are familiar with, that is in their experience, and tell them if you experience this, you must be able to answer the question. You are basically putting them in the same situation you are when you hear a song, but you don't remember the name. You become so crazy with knowing the name. It's because your previous self knew it. and that's the closest you can be. All right, but there's many other ones. We can talk about this for. I do want to take a few of your questions. So let me just kind of conclude here by giving you kind of a bonus strategy. That's number 6, and that is the one that is perhaps more surprising, and actually I would say the hardest for all of us to adapt, and it has been for me. And that is that the curiosity of the students will end as soon as you give them the answer. So this is the central idea I wanted to convey today. And it's even more important if you choose to do synchronous online sessions with video conferencing like Zoom, for instance. So as I told you at the beginning, the focus should be on motivation rather than information transfer. But the principle is the same for teaching. So I have always believed that we cannot force an unmotivated student to learn anything. But you cannot prevent a motivated one from doing so. I believe motivation is key. But even if you disagree with me, as an economist, I can tell you that technological innovation in the education market is giving you no choice but to assume I am right, and motivation is key right now. I am sure many of you are here today because you realize that the market is forcing us to reevaluate our jobs as teachers, to redefine what teaching is, and I argue that is a good thing. But today I propose that the best way to capitalize that is to focus on motivation, and I hope I gave you one way to do that. And that is by proposing a different definition for teaching, is that really teaching should be about opening information gaps and not about closing them. Thank you. I'll take your questions now.
Okay, we have a few questions. Feel free to, guys, send through the chat panel or the questions panel if you have questions for Jose now. But I'll go ahead and get started. Okay, Jose, what is the best piece of feedback you've gotten from a student from using this approach?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I'm glad you asked it because I actually put this on the I frame it and put it on my wall. I was so excited. A student basically described my class as being on the edge of your seat, which is the way he would describe a movie, and which is essentially what I sometimes see the job we have as instructors as so the same way that directors on the movie have, right? You're trying to generate some kind of motivation from students. So a student basically said that coming to my class is like going to a movie in which you are on the edge of your seat all the time, looking for the answers.
That's great. Okay, we have another question. How can these strategies to foster curiosity be adapted for asynchronous online courses?
That's a fantastic question, and I can take a long time answering that because a lot of the research I have done on some of these strategies, I have done it asynchronously because it's the best way to do research on this. And when you look at the results are different. I mean, in some of you do lose some of the benefits when you go into the asynchronous world, and you lose them in a particular way that is not necessarily intuitive. But the principles remain. All right. So if I have posted this question about opportunity costs, and I have not given you the answer, and I tell you I won't tell you the answer, and I say, okay, let's come back next week and we continue to talk about the question, you will continue to be interested in this question. So you won't lose, but there's two ways in which some of the increasing curiosity might diminish. One is, if you remember that curiosity, the definition of curiosity I gave you is actually very closely related to attention. And attention is a very difficult thing to maintain. When you pay attention to a movie, even when you pay attention to a presentation. In fact, what cognitive science says, we have about 5 to 10 minutes of attention. And after that attention, we start losing attention pretty quickly if we don't see the person or what we're looking at changing. So attention is very, very, very difficult to get. And because attention is difficult, the more time you let with the curiosity gap open, the more propensity will be to diminish. The second is that the students may try to find the answers in a different way than it is not you. Now, I think a question like the opportunity cost question doesn't suffer so much from that because it's such an open question depending on your assumptions. So I can keep that question open and it will work very well in a discussion forum. In fact, I have used that question in a discussion forum. In fact, many times I present that question in class and I do not answer it until the next class. Now, I cannot do that with the two balls questions because that question has one answer And once a student finds the answer, then there's still some gap about why the answer is such, but it is lost. So I would say that when you're going to the asynchronous, you have to make sure that the questions are even more conceptual and more kind of ambiguous in the answer than they are if you use them in a synchronous session like today.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, lots of questions come through. I'm trying to prioritize these. I did get a technical question. Can iClicker be used with Zoom? I'll quickly address that. Yes, absolutely. iClicker just floats over and with any software you're using. So whether it's Zoom, GoToWebinar like today, Microsoft Teams, whatever video conferencing you're using, iClicker absolutely works with. Okay, question for you, Jose. If I'm using my class time to open information gaps, how do I find time to do the information transfer?
Excellent question. And unfortunately, I wasn't able to talk about that today, and I agree that wasn't fair. I think information transfer with the technology we have today is much more effective done asynchronously, meaning online. And by I would say recording videos of yourself or recording videos or things of that nature. That is, you won't replicate exactly the same thing that happens in the classroom, but you can replicate quite a bit, right? Then at that point, it's really a question that is personal, right? So you have to decide how much you gain by spending your class time on the, kind of playing around with a gap that is open versus providing students with information that is just transfer of information. I can tell you that what I do in my own class is that my class is completely about opening gaps and kind of playing around with them. So I go over maybe 3 or 4 of these questions with my class, using iClickers in different ways and using Socratic method. And most of my transfer of information of concepts really takes place asynchronously outside of class. But I say that meaning that this is a very, very long answer, but that is essentially the way I have tried to manage the challenge you have pointed out. I basically use my class for my synchronous class for the idea of using the gap motivation, and then all the information transfer takes place asynchronously.
Okay. A really interesting question coming through from Jose Fatia. Have you gotten any comments against this approach from students, like to not do this?
From students, okay, from students, not in the evaluations, right? So I mean, every so often, a student come to me at the end of the class and he really wants me to give him the answer. I play a case by case, right? If one student comes to class and wants to know the answer and is frustrated, I mean, I'll sometimes tell them the answer. Sometimes I give him more leading questions. I can tell you that if I have 3 students coming to me telling me that why don't I give them the answer, as soon as they tell me that, they start arguing with each other about what the answer is, and I automatically tell you that you're doing exactly what I want you to do, which is to talk among yourself and to figure out things on your own. It is something that you have to, it's very non-traditional for students. So every time you do some things like this, I think it's important that you justify it to the students. And I do spend a lot of time justifying my approach and being transparent about what I'm doing with my students, letting them know that I'm not trying to trick them, letting them know of the benefits. I give them everything behind the curtain, right? I don't do anything kind of like a magic, right? I tell them, I essentially, I have a presentation in my class. It's the second class, in which is essentially what I presented to you. I give them my my strategy because I think it's important to be transparent. And maybe because I do that, I haven't gotten any kind of very much negative review from my students. I did before I provided all of the asynchronous transfer of information online. But once the students have a way of finding what they were finding before in your classroom, the chalk and talk lecture, right? Once they have a way to finding that, in my own experience, I found that students are perfectly happy consuming it outside the classroom.
Okay, we have a couple of questions around prep and resources. So kind of two questions in one. How much prep time does using this approach add to your lecture prep? And are there resources to help develop motivation inspiring questions?
That's a great question. I would think, as anything at the beginning, it will be harder, right? So the most difficult part about this, in technical terms, right? Not, I think the most difficult part about this is to change the way you teach. I think that's very, very difficult for all of us. It was difficult for me, so that will be very difficult. Now, once you commit to it and once you believe in it and want to do it, I think the hardest part is actually finding the questions. Which questions are better and which questions are not, and that is more like an art, right? I think you have to try a question in class, see how the students vote, see what are the misconceptions the question is generating, then kind of fix it, change it, and play around with it. So it's a lot of trial and error. I think a very easy way of trying to do this right away in your class is to go to your last exam. If you have multiple choice questions, to go to those questions. If you have essay questions that are challenging, go to those questions and create a few choices. So take the hardest question from the exam and bring them to class with you and make them a multiple choice out of them and just make the class out of those questions, right? I think that's kind of what I did. The Eric Clapton question was a question I had in my exam for a long time. And eventually I realized that it wasn't working so well in the exam. It was working a lot better when I had time to go over them when they were in class. So that's kind of what I did. I took all those questions on the exam that I thought they were a little too challenging for the exam, and I brought them to class, and they became amazing questions for discussion. So I would say that's kind of a good way to do it. In terms of resources, not a lot of people are actually focusing on motivation in general, but not a lot of people are working on curiosity. I have a few references I can give you, but I'll probably be better if I kind of send them back to you after the talk. So I'm sure I'll give them to Lindsay. I'm sure she will probably provide them to you. There's a few books out there that I could recommend with a more expanding discussion on some of the stuff I talk about today.
Okay, a couple more questions while we have time. There's a comment on, it sounds like you're creating a flipped classroom in online formats. I love the idea of transparency and not mystifying the process. That's wonderful.
I agree.
Okay. The question, here's another question. Most students are curious at the start of the term, but I feel like it doesn't stay that way through the entire term. Do you have any suggestions to get over this?
Exactly. Yeah, and that's what I said. I mean, attention is very, very hard. I mean, for me, it makes it interesting. It makes it good because it's challenging, right? But yes, attention is. We have to recognize that attention at one time and attention in a period of 3 months is a very difficult thing to achieve, right? So what are the strategies that we can do? There's a couple of ways in which you can adapt some of the strategies I gave you today into, let's say, a 3 months period. For instance, one of them is that if you have to close a gap, then you want to maintain that gap over a period of, let's say, 2 or 3 weeks, then the best way to close that gap is in incremental ways, right? Not close it completely, right? To give the students a little piece of the information they need to close the gap and let them actually figure out other pieces on their own when they come back. So if you think of closing gaps incrementally over a period of 2 or 3 weeks, or let's say a month, then that is a very effective model to maintain the students curious over a long period of time, right? Again, you can use the idea of closing information sets to maintain students over a period of a month or two. What does that mean that you want context and you want a constrained information set? Well, it means that it's actually a good idea to actually have like case studies, right? That students actually have time to work on them. If you give them a month or two to work on a case study, their interest on that case study, if it's handled adequately and you are dealing with it in the right way, their interest on the case study will increase as they actually get closer to the end of the case study, right? But it is so because they have a constrained set of information, right? So So there are ways in which you can adapt the operationalized definitions of curiosity into a 2 or 3 month course, and those are 2 of them, right? So one of them is I work on incremental things, and the second one is, I think, things such as case studies, which are fantastic for critical thinking, if they're handled correctly, are very, very good for motivation too. A lot better than if you give the students a different example every week, all right? Maintaining the same example, there's an argument for that if you want to maintain interest over a long period of time. But all of that with the caveat that it will be more challenging to maintain student attentions the longer you go in period.
Okay, a couple of questions I'm going to combine into a big question about the approach in general. What made you explore this approach to begin with? And then also, in a few words, what would you say the difference is between your approach and what could be called a traditional approach?
That's a really good question. Okay, so the first one, and I think that my answer is very related. I have always been, and I think all of us are, I have always been very frustrated when I finish a class and a student come back and tell me, well, which part of the class is going to be on the exam, right? So I have always, been kind of a intuitively believer that I want students to care about what I'm telling them to care about, what I'm encouraging them to care about, because they do, and not because I'm giving them points. So I think I've been searching for that answer for the last, I don't know, since I've been teaching. So motivation obviously have been very, very interesting to me for a very long time. At the beginning, I was interested in flipping the classroom. So I spent a lot of time developing tools because I felt like I needed to do things in class that I could not, to motivate students that I could not do unless I have enough material that they could actually consume asynchronously. So I spent a lot of my time developing that. But once that was developed, and a lot of that is like that product I got with my co-author Eric, once that was developed, then I went into motivation itself. And once I went in there, curiosity was one of the first ones because it's just kind of fun, and some of the papers I read really made an impact. If anyone have read the paper that George Lowenstein published in '96, it's a fantastic paper, and it was just eye-opening. I mean, I really believe that this is the way our mind works, and this is the way I become curious and stuff. So that's what. If you think about what is the second question, my overall goal and my teaching approach, I would love to get rid of exams and get rid of grades and for us to teach in a space in which students really, here's what I want, right? So I want in 20 years when my daughter goes to college, or less than 15 years, I want when my daughter goes to college, the situation is if she goes to class and her instructor cancels class, that she's upset, right? Not that her instructor cancels class and she's happy about it. If that's still the situation in most courses, I don't think we have made that much of an impact on education. I think if that situation is in most courses in 15 years, instructor cancel classes and everyone is upset, I think we made a difference. So that's what that's kind of my goal, right? To create that environment in education.
Okay, we have a lot more questions that are coming through, but Jose, I think I'm going to have to send you those afterwards because we will take the last few minutes to wrap up. I just wanted to say thank you for everyone that joined, and thank you, Jose, for a wonderful presentation and for piquing our curiosity today. We'll have the recordings and the recording and the slides that will go out within a day or so. You'll get a link to that, and that will have both items on there. The other couple of things I wanted to mention, there have been a few questions around iClicker and cost and attendance. Someone asked about attendance with iClicker. iClicker does track attendance in class as well as do polling, which Jose used today, and quizzing as well. We are offering a free access to iClicker right now for anyone who's moving their current classes over to online courses. So for any classes that are in session right now, you can visit iClicker.com and click the banner at the top of the screen to click through to that to get more information there. If you are a new iClicker user and you've just received, codes that we're giving out right now, be sure to sign up for a training because that'll help you get everything set up in your class. But I think that's all I have. Thank you guys so much for your questions.
Sorry, Lindsay, can I put
Yeah.
the video, the answer to the video? I just leave you guys with that.
Yes, please do.
There you go. So slow motion. The dip always wins. So now that you believe it, you have to figure out why that is. All right, thanks, Lindsay.
That's great. Everybody knows the answer now. That's wonderful. Okay, cool. Well, thank you, Jose, and thank you, everyone.